One of the things that's probably innate is how much you like working in teams. I'm not sure there is a single definition. So I would actually put it into like three buckets that I've seen people use to define product review. They're going to try to come at you. And so if you, for instance, have a really long presentation at first with little room for discussion, they're just going to drop off the meeting. It's clear that you haven't gotten into all the details yet. They're just going to grill you right into the part that you haven't heard about. As a product leader, I think it's really important. And I would personally give feedback to other leaders who I felt like weren't creating psychological safety. But if you're an ICPM, you should just assume that psychological safety doesn't exist, because it's better to not be caught off guard by that random exec.
Welcome to the Product Weekend podcast with Brito, Moita and Gergely. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the 16th episode of the Product Weekend podcast, the last one of our second season. I'm your host, Moita, and today, with Brito, we've got an exceptional conversation lined up for you. In this episode, we sit down with Aakash, an experienced product leader with a rich background spanning companies like ThreadUp, Epic Games, Affirm, and Apollo. We delve into the nuances of product management, tackling key topics such as the importance of balancing team dynamics, the art of effective product reviews, and the emerging trends in the field. Aakash also shares his journey from being an IC product manager to a VP of product, and how he successfully transitioned now to a full-time content creator role. You'll hear his take on essential qualities required to succeed as a PM, the crucial role of building strong stakeholder relationships, and his proudest moments working in innovative projects, like Travis Scott's groundbreaking concert in Fortnite. Whether you're an aspiring PM, a seasoned leader, or just curious about the product management world, this episode is packed with thoughtful insights and actionable advice. So sit back, relax, and get ready for an enlightening discussion that will broaden your understanding of product management. Let's dive in. Welcome, Aakash. It's great to have you here on the Product Weekend podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, I think, a year since we chatted last, but I've seen a lot about the product weekend online. So it's been fun cheering you guys on the sidelines, and happy to be back.
Yeah, awesome. We always start these conversations with a particular question, which is about good times. And I wanted to ask you about a recent weekend that you really enjoyed.
Oh, love it. This actually last weekend was my daughter's first birthday. So that was definitely really fun. My parents who live in the west side of Michigan in a place called Kalamazoo, which actually does exist. They live on a lake. It was cool seeing a lot of my high school age friends and family friends all over there. And like we had a bunch of our relatives also come, all the ones who were in America. And so we literally had probably like 30 people in my parents' lake house for the whole weekend. So it was family filled. And yeah, it gave me a lot of joy.
Awesome. That's great. It's great to hear spending time with family and loved ones. It's always amazing. Actually, just this weekend I was also with some friends from high school, and it's always good to go back to the roots. I guess a lot of our listeners have heard of you, seen you on LinkedIn, or probably even read your newsletter. But for the ones that don't, can you give us a brief introduction of your background? What have you been up to in product management, and also what are you up to currently?
Yeah, so when I entered product management in 2008, Marty Kagan had just published Inspired, but I think that the job was very different from what it is now. Like, I had worked at a startup. It wasn't like a negative thing that I was creating designs back then in Photoshop. It wasn't a negative thing that when a customer would tell me a bug, I would just deploy the change myself. So I was familiar, it was really full stack product management with the engineering side of things, the design side of things. And that's because my background for my entire life was that I had been building apps. I'd been building apps for web, for Windows for many years before that. That's how I entered product management, but I saw and witnessed this like dramatic ascent. Basically my career, as it's progressed, I feel like the number of product managers has just been on a hockey stick, and the amount of content about product management has, and that means that like the field has advanced a lot. So as I moved from my own startup through ThreadUp, which is a public company in the United States, through Epic Games, Affirm, and most recently Apollo, I saw that a lot of PMs were expected to have skills that they maybe didn't have. Many people on my own teams, they would have backgrounds. I was valedictorian at Columbia, but then I joined the company and the first thing I hear is this person's struggling. And I'm just surprised because before they were product managers, they were investment bankers, then they worked in private equity, then they get their MBA from some prestigious school, but they're struggling as a product manager. They must have the raw horsepower, right? So that to me was the impetus to start writing more deeply about product management. And what was a side gig turned into the full-time thing, like you actually. While you were at Product People when we were talking last, I was at Apollo. And so I was a VP of product there, leading a lot of the features that you see in Apollo now, like their AI email tools, like their new onboarding hub. So lots of those types of features I was shipping and launching. It was actually a dream job because our CEO was amazing. The engineering teams were so cool. Like they would ship if let's say me and the CEO and a designer aligned on a design and we handed it over to engineering, literally 2 weeks later just be in the product live. So it was like amazing. And it wasn't like I had to go to the QA session or something like that. So it was a really cool gig. But I have 2 kids and I wasn't willing to make that trade-off for any longer. For me, just taking control of my life, I needed to choose either all in on the VP job, which as people know is a 50 to 60 hour a week job, or all in on the newsletter. And for me, I got more joy from the newsletter. I think it's just anybody probably would. You go from 16 meetings a day to 1, just this podcast. Or you go from your bosses messaging you at 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. to I can do whatever I want. It's 11 p.m. I'm going to watch Jujutsu Kaisen. It's been fun, and yeah, I'm enjoying it.
That's awesome to hear. It's super inspiring also to see that there are other options. I think a lot of people think there's just this one career ladder that I need to climb, and I will work myself to death and not be with my loved ones, not enjoy life, while there's actually different options. And even for people that want to stay in the job, I think there's also like lighter touch, like either as interim or advisor. For people that are more experienced, those are also potential options. So really happy to
I'd be curious to hear, like, how did you have built the conviction to go all in on product weekend?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was about starting something on the side that I was not dependent on, and making it into something that people were asking for. It was very pull. I didn't have to push that much. And then also realizing that, I was already making some money with it. It was not enough to as a full-time job, but there were signals that it had potential to grow. And it was just like, okay, if I go all in on this, I'll be able to do a much better job, do more of it, and eventually grow. I guess it was similar to you. You saw the newsletter, you saw people picking it up, following, getting engaged, and you saw like, if I have more time for this, I can do much more with it, right? For me, it was a very calculated risk. It was not just something jumping into the unknown completely. But yeah, it always takes a leap of faith. But yeah, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, that's what I recommend to everybody listening. Maybe just make sure you have some traction.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, that's a smart move. And also the market is different. It's very hard now to raise capital with just a slide deck. You need to have something that is selling and that it's somewhat proven already. But yeah, back to the thing that you were saying, that you saw people struggling with this job and you started writing more about it and helping other people grow in their careers. What are some of the qualities that you think are essential for someone to be a good product manager? Maybe thinking of like innate things that you think are important for someone to see, is this job for me or not?
Innate. Okay. Then I'm going to reflect back on my kids and their personality differences. I think that one of the things that's probably innate is how much you like working in teams. So reflect back on your childhood. Did you gravitate towards the team sports or the individual sports? Were you playing football or tennis? And if you were on the football side of the spectrum, then I think continue on aspiring as a PM. If, on the other hand, you struggled with those team dynamics, if when it came to the group project at school, instead of bringing everybody along, you just threw everybody on your back and did all the work yourself, dude, that's really going to be tough as a PM. Because as a PM, you are accountable for the success of the product. However, all of the decisions are generally made collaboratively if you really want to succeed. Your designers and your tech leads, and even some of the IC engineers and your analyst and your user researcher and your VP of product and your CEO and your VP of marketing and your CRO, this really long list, that's your 10-person soccer team, all need to feel like they contributed to the decision you made, that you listened to what they said, that you facilitated that their opinions were effectively integrated into the process. And this means that you need to have a very high capacity for tough conversations, for tons of meetings, for high responsiveness over Slack or Teams or whatever chat application you're using. And all those skills, I find, there's just a certain group of us, and probably even me in that category, who are, that's not like what gives them energy. That's not what is their strong suit. And when they get pinged in the middle of writing a PRD, they just get annoyed. I think that those people, they often do move out of the profession after some point. Versus you see the people who just thrive on team sports and integration, like staying, like they're PMs when they're 55. But you do see this phenomenon of a lot of PMs aging out of the career for some reason or another. So that's one element. The second element I would say is, can you fundamentally live without long, deep work blocks? A lot of PMs, they come from an engineering background, right? They're used to 2 meetings, a stand-up meeting, and then maybe some QA session or something like that. And they're not trying to have 6 meetings a day, but even your entry-level IUC PM has 6 meetings a day. And then as you ramp up to VP, you have 16 meetings, or actually more. So like when I was at a VP of product, I would usually have 3 conflicting meetings from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on my calendar. So sometimes I would say I'm just not going to all 3 just because I had to do some work. But that would maybe be for like 30 minutes or an hour. And it'd be because like I have to write something for the CEO that's time urgent. Otherwise, like you're in a lot of meetings, you're doing a lot of context switching. And so if you need 3 hours to write your PRD, like either you're going to do that in the evening or you're not going to do it. And so people who can work on those 30-minute time blocks, I'd say those are the 2 most important innate characteristics.
Looking to myself, I was really into team sports, but my parents only put me on individual ones. So I kind of look to team sports like idle ones. I want to be like that. And that kind of helps into the PM. But I do think that sometimes the background that I have in those kind of most individual tasks, basically individual, like I had to motivate myself up. Those kind of things, when things go really tough, I kind of put everything in silence and go like with everything on my back. And now I can it's like starting to understand why. And I think it was the first time I think like into my background as like a kid with sports, that the impact that it has in my product management life. Cool.
Interesting, and something that it relates to both of your points, this kind of people pleasing. And now that I think about it, I think it was you that mentioned that important skill of being, remember the wording, but it was basically being likable or having people on your side without being a people pleaser and trying to make everything great for everyone at the same time. I think this balance is really important because you have all these meetings and you want to be in as many as possible and support people as much as possible. But if you just run around to everything that people ask you for and put you in your calendar, you end up with 16-hour long days and not being able to do your best work because you're just chasing the next thing and chasing this kind of validation eventually. So yeah, I think it's a important balance to strike, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think every PM listening probably has made that mistake of just saying yes to a few too many meetings.
Yeah, that's true. And thinking back on your career, what has been your proudest moment or achievement so far?
Yeah, we went back to Epic Games. We were all in COVID, and like everybody else, I just decided, oh, I'm gonna use all this extra time when I used to meet with friends and work out and go out to restaurants just to work. So I was working like crazy, enjoying it though, because I was working on Fortnite. Actually, just as part of work, I used to play Fortnite from 10 p.m. to midnight every single day. So I had a large community of, essentially, I like to play with people my age. So I didn't play that much with 12 or 13-year-olds. So I had these 20-something men who had to log in online. We'd maybe have a beer and just be like making dumb jokes that are definitely not, I can say on this podcast. And it was so much fun. So I was really enjoying life. And we got this opportunity at Fortnite, which was just amazing, which was to have Travis Scott, who is like a rapper who I really liked, do a live concert to our audience of like 80 million monthly active users. And we had this opportunity to really create a very first, I believe, live in-game concert experience. So this was before Post Malone and Pokemon Go, or before basically concerts and video games all over the place. We brought Travis Scott into Fortnite. And you should check the video out on YouTube, because we had on our side a team of visual artists, but more importantly, Travis on his side had a gigantic team that he decided to pay and hire of these 3D effects artists. Because as you guys know, like this type of CGI is incredibly time consuming to make. And yeah, it's a masterpiece. 10 minutes of his 5 or 6 most important tracks put together, but it takes you through this amazing world. And the thing that YouTube doesn't do justice for is that if you were live with the other 28 million people live, which is basically the biggest concert of all time, you could like traverse around, and it was on the map that you were playing. So if you play Fortnite, like you're in one map for 14 weeks. So you really know the map, and like Travis is coming and like exploding part of the map. And like, it was just a mind-blowing experience. Crazy, yeah. And my little role, obviously, as you can tell from the story, the publishing partnership person, that guy, he got promoted like 2 times after the concert because he really drove the success of it. But I was on the product team supporting, right? Helping those motivate those visual effects artists when they were working like 90-hour weeks, helping people drive towards this deadline. Travis, we lost contact with him 4 separate times for a week and a half, but keeping everybody on the path of the creative direction that he had given us. So that was my, small role in this project that hundreds of people played a role. But I'm so proud of it just because I think that bringing people together in COVID, going back to the context, with 28 million people live concurrently in one concert was so much fun. And going back to my buddies, like I was in there with my buddies who all just, I believe it was during the workday that we all did it. So they all like just put a block 1 hour in their work to come and watch. Was really special.
That's awesome. Yeah, it must have been something really special, especially making something that was never done before. Even technically, I imagine it was very challenging having all these people online at the same time with all these rendering and visual effects.
It would have been way more than 28 million if we didn't have to cap it. But just like Fortnite always pushed the limit of AWS. So like we always had 80 AWS people with our infra people, like, because we would always knock something over. Like, always there would be like in that specific concert, I believe people couldn't log in like 20 minutes before the concert.
Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, amazing story. I think you actually wrote something about it. I remember seeing something about it. So yeah, maybe we can trace that back and put it in the show notes as well if people want to dive deeper. Awesome. About your writing, you write about a lot of different topics, but you recently wrote a piece about product reviews. I found it particularly interesting and actionable, so I'd like to dive a bit deeper into that one today. Before we dive into product reviews, I wanted to ask you for a podcast review. So if you're listening to this and you're enjoying it, please leave a rating on your favorite podcast app, either it's Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. And also make sure to share this episode with a friend that might really enjoy it. It would mean the world to us and would really help us grow our podcast further. Yeah, now let's go back to the episode. And there you mentioned the lack of resources available on this specific topic, which really resonated because I didn't find proper guide on it when I was working as an IC. And my first question is, why do you think this gap exists? Like, why aren't people talking that much about this topic that seems so relevant, right, for the impact a PM can have?
Yeah, it's actually a new invention is the main reason. So if you look at like all the major PM books and stuff like that, like the biggest PM books were all published pre-2018. I personally hadn't been in anything on my calendar titled a product review until like 2020. It's somehow just rapidly spread throughout the entire industry. I believe the origin is pretty old. Like I think that actually from what some of my contacts at Google, like Google was doing product reviews with Marissa Mayer back in like 2008. But as tends to be the case, like those Silicon Valley companies, those product leaders, maybe you were at Google for 10 years. Now somebody hires you as a chief product officer, you bring in the product review practice. And like that, I believe it disseminated from Silicon Valley outward into the world. Now to the point where I have newsletter readers in, like you said, like in Europe and Portugal, but also in India and Brazil, even in Russia and in China and Vietnam that are saying, hey, I have these stressful product reviews. So I think that it's a relatively new invention, especially the term, like the term of art, product review. And it's because of that, because it has this official term that everybody recognizes, I think it's almost gotten to the level of a PRD, where it's a highly relevant example that product leaders use to give performance reviews for PMs, because all PMs are doing it. Many activities that the PM does, maybe this PM over here spends a lot of time with his ML engineering team versus this PM spends a lot of time with her designer versus this PM spends a lot of time with sales. None of those then are a relevant stakeholder that you can ask, okay, who's the better of the three? However, there are going to be, like, for instance, the head of product who might have sat in on the product reviews for all three of them on their big features. Maybe even the CEO did. You can even ask the CEO, what do you think of these PMs? Or most likely the CEO will just volunteer their opinion, as we know CEOs do. So I think that the product review has grown into this highly stressful environment, but because it's so new and a lot of the content creators about product hadn't been actually practicing product since then, it hadn't been written about much.
Yeah, makes sense. And just to be clear on the terms and the definition, and I guess it can also come a bit from Scrum and from the sprint review session. Just to clarify, what do you exactly mean by product reviews and what are some different formats of reviews?
So what is it? Like, honestly, even though I've written guides about it, for this guide, I talked to a lot of people about it. I have people asking me about it. I'm not sure there is a single definition. So I would actually put it into like 3 buckets that I've seen people use to define product review. So the first bucket, this is what we had at a firm. So we actually had 4 stages of product reviews that you can think of in a ladder. So you have your first review, which is with your product pod. So this might be like, I'm a PM on growth activation. I have a design partner, a design engineering partner, and an engineering team. I might have a review with them first. The second is with the product org. So I'm within growth activation. There's some other growth leader, which in that case was me. And then there were some other consumer leaders, which were some VP level folks. And then they would be in the product org review. Then there would be the leadership review. So that would include our head of product, our CEO, and our head of product marketing. And then there would be an exec review on top of that, which would include our entire senior leadership team. So all the C-suite and SVPs. So that would be like a 4-stage product review. The second example, my brother's a PM at DoorDash. So they have 3 stages. They have a brief review, they have a design review, and they have a ship review. So that's another example where you track the product process over time instead of the levels of individuals. And then the final, Meta, a lot of Meta PMs have written about this. They have one single product review for big features, and even Mark or Boz or some of these famous people might be joining that meeting, where you review like a key roadmap, strategy, or vision. Those are the three types of product reviews you typically see. And yeah, it's a term that's just a catch-all. So I feel like it's very important to understand what type of product review you're walking into.
Yeah, exactly.
And what do you think are like the most common mistakes that product managers actually make when doing this kind of product reviews? Do you think, and even further, do you think it's like worse on the first scenario, so on the little product part, or do you see more mistakes on the executive one, since the group is so different and normally you are more afraid as well of what you're going to say?
The problem is that your product pod, you're building credibility with day in, day out, right? So if you're doing your work, checking your metrics, if you're doing your work, talking to your users, if you're doing your work, earnestly listening to feedback from the rest of the team, they'll give you a lot of credit if you say something a little bit without context. If you're trying to be concise and you just say 2 lines, they're going to steel man that argument. Your average skeptical exec is going to straw man that argument. Especially, and this is what PMs don't know, especially if they've heard some negative chatter about you. And this is just the sad fact, right? Executives are always bad-mouthing PMs behind their backs. Most PMs need to understand this harsh reality. This is especially true for execs outside of product. So you might have a sales exec who just lost a deal because a product manager didn't add something to their roadmap. You might have a marketing exec who is missing his numbers on MQLs and he blames the velocity of the marketing engineering team that a PM leads. So this is extremely common. So these people, they'll have chatter. So those marketing and sales execs, they might tell the product marketing exec, they might tell the design exec, they might tell the engineering exec. Now you get into this leadership review and that person isn't going to give you the benefit of the doubt that your tech leader or your tech lead or your design partner would be giving you. And they're going to try to come at you. And so if you, for instance, have a really long presentation at first with little room for discussion, they're just going to drop off the meeting. If it's clear that you haven't gotten into all the details yet, they're just going to grill you right into the part that you haven't heard about. Oh, what is this? What is this? Oh, you completely missed this fact. You missed and they'll just go down that line. If your content isn't polished, they'll say, was this worth my time? They'll message your boss or your skip level even the next day or the next time they run into them. Yeah, that meeting was a total waste of my time. Or if you start to have multiple problems that your feature solves, let's say, hey, that person, they don't have a very clear problem they're solving. They don't even know. Or if you don't have good data supporting, they'll say, oh, they're not very data driven. They're just doing what they want to build. Or if you're just presenting data without the takeaway, they'll misinterpret your data. Oh yeah, he thinks that this is going to somehow improve activation rates, but activation rates have been trending down for 6 months under his leadership and I don't trust him. So there's lots of things like that all of those examples that I mentioned, I personally experienced too. So I just want these harsh realities to be out there for product managers so that they understand when they're walking into these things, you want to lead with data, user insights. You don't even want to have the product review if you don't have those things. So it's very important to come prepared for the leadership layer.
Yeah, I think we'll dive deeper into that preparation challenge, but specifically on this thing, on the being grilled and put on the spot and being really challenged while you're doing this. How can you balance as a PM this being honest and completely transparent about product challenges while still presenting a positive outlook on the review that's not going to transpire as your team is failing or you're not delivering the best results? And also, how important do you think psychological safety is for these effective meetings?
As a product leader, I think it's really important. And I would personally give feedback to other leaders who I felt like weren't creating psychological safety. But if you're an ICPM, you should just assume that psychological safety doesn't exist, because it's better to not be caught off guard by that random exec. And what you'll find also about execs is that they're political masterminds. So they might not even grill you in the meeting, but they might grill you to your skip level after the meeting. So I would much rather you say, don't assume, even if you're in the friendliest environment in the world, that suddenly you can just say something, even one sentence, that isn't well thought through. I would much rather you speak a little bit less. You invite your design partner, you invite your tech lead to come with you so that if you need to take a minute to respond to somebody, they might step in and they might have thought about that particular area of the problem more. In fact, my favorite person to bring to product reviews at a firm is my analyst. 2 reasons. 1, the CEO loved him. 2, he had always thought about the metrics and he knew how to bring a metrics-based response. Excuse me. The CEO might say something crazy. We need to make sure this works really well on mobile web. And I had just been thinking about the app. And I'm just thinking about how do I frame this response. The analyst comes in and says, yeah, max like 6% of our transactions come via mobile web. As a result, I do agree with the team's sort of prioritization here that you see of the iOS. This is actually responsible for 64% of the revenue. Boom, like you're covered, right? So that's one element. Bring your team along. A second element is don't oversell your point of view. So I think a lot of people, they hear my advice now. Okay, user and data insights. You know what, CEO? You know what, VP of marketing? I freaking know this problem inside and out, the solution inside and out. I think it's much better to actually assign like a confidence to show your process and where you are in the process and to say something like, here is the latest state of what we have discovered. What are we missing? What context do you have that we don't? And that way, when they do catch you, because they often will, because they'll have context you don't about some area of the business, sounds like that was what you were asking for. That's why you called the meeting to begin with. So that's a really important element. Then the other thing is you're going to face a lot of questions. So you're going to face some questions where you don't know the answer. So what do? Your team members didn't step up for you. So I say something like, so what I hear you asking is that, and then restate what they said. I agree this is important. I think this will inform and then explain. So can we follow up with that after the meeting? I think that's a really strong way. And your boss will say, oh, wow, I like how you handle them. Or let's say they give you some feedback that you disagree with. Then I would try to start with, thank you for sharing that feedback. I see why this thing feels like the right way to approach it, but I respectfully disagree. And here's why. And here's some data or user insight. I've been talking to 7 users a week, and this is what I learned from them. And then you might have something like, a lot of times I run into this. I even run into this sometimes with my managers, where they're coming up with topics or questions that are not important. They're essentially preventing progress in the product review towards things that you do need to cover. And I would say this is really common. At least I've seen this in almost every product review. So then what you need to do is you have a way to move on. And the way to move on has to be respectful. So you say something like, that's an interesting point. I think that in the broader scheme of things, our goal is X, and it's not important that we talk about this because of Y. Is it all right if me and the team address this with you after the meeting? So I think these are some different sort of phrases you can use, and you can notice how I'm trying to be respectful but move forward to address these situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those are definitely great points. And I think what you mentioned there of not being disagreeable, unnecessarily disagreeable, try to understand also where people are coming from and what they're bringing to the table and use that to your advantage of, okay, that piece of insight is really valuable because now we can adapt this and that, and not saying you don't know what you're talking about, because that's gonna create the conflict, because these people, as you said, they are very experienced in their fields and they want to be.
And we can forget that people have memory as well. And once we go to that chaos and chaotic time, once they'll be prepared for that on the next one, and they'll be harsher with us in things that we will fail, and we have to have that in our conscience as well. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, those are great points. And going a bit more specific, could you share a particular example of a especially challenging product review you've had and how you navigated it?
So I've had so many challenging product reviews that I was actually like racking my brain about which one to use. So I think that a really good example, I would go like early in my career, so because that I can relate a little bit more to maybe the ICs listening. So back when I first joined ThreadUp, I joined as an IC. I later became director of growth, but I joined as an IC. And I had recently been a startup founder, so I hadn't been used to the collaborative sort of asking for people environment. So that mistake I just mentioned around overselling your POV, I made that exact mistake. I basically wanted to work on the pricing system at the company because my goals were around converting visitors to purchasers, typical growth sort of role. And so nowadays, a lot of people call this like conversion rate optimization, and there might even be like a marketer who runs it. Back in the day, product growth team running it, product manager on it. I was tasked with this. And so I said, hey, we need to move pricing. I basically think like pricing is one of the most important levers. Like we can redesign the homepage as much as we want. We can change the onboarding. We can remove or add an email gate. These are all tried and true levers. So as I come up with this proposal, I do my user research. I have data. I've worked with an analyst who's on the growth squad, and that's like kind of an important detail. And so I show up to the product review with our CEO and our COO. And I say COO because it's important to realize, what does the COO do at a company like ThredUp? So ThredUp was a secondhand clothing marketplace. The COO manages these giant, capitally intensive warehouses with thousands of workers sorting, taking photos of clothes, storing the clothes, picking the clothes out, and shipping them to customers. And I had basically neglected that entire side of the pricing equation. So I come into the product review hard selling my ideas around how this is going to improve conversion rate, how we're going to predict like what items to reduce discount for users that they're most likely to buy based on the advertising campaign that they came in on. Thought I had an amazing plan. And the COO starts to ask me questions about what is the impact going to be on sell-through? And I just didn't answer them in such a way that like, oh, please tell me more. This is why I brought you to the product review. I need to consider sell-through and maybe collaborate more with your team. I said it more like a way like, me and the analyst have figured it out, and that's not as important as conversion. But let's be honest, sell-through is as important, especially for his org. It drove a lot of the costs of those warehouses. So I had basically neglected an entire side of the business. I oversold my POV. And on top of that, when he was trying to help me, I wasn't receptive to his help. And so then the CEO started to pile in. And it was funny. I think I took it well. Ultimately, like that evening itself, I came home and talked to my then girlfriend, now wife. And she was like, they messed up that meeting, right? So this is what I recommend people do if they mess up the meeting. Is I just stayed up for 4 or 5 hours that evening itself. I had some buddies on operations, luckily, who I could tap to do some evening work with me. We did some cool analyses. We followed up on the data. And then I actually got them to send the email to the COO. Boom. I then, the next morning itself, had a follow-up meeting with him where I caught all his feedback. He actually was at the warehouse, so I drove to the warehouse. Normally, ThredUp was in San Francisco. The warehouse was in East Bay. I just drove to East Bay, met up with him. I think I canceled some meetings as well that morning. And I basically got him on my side. So once I got him on my side, then I sent the follow-up email to the CEO. And that type of fast movement when you make a mistake in a product review is really important because my CEO at ThredUp loved me, promoted me many times, continued to give me more and more responsibility. And I'm still friends with that COO. So even if you mess up the product review, don't think that it's the end.
Yeah. Try to follow up and make sure that you tap into the things that you misunderstood or you overlooked. Yeah. Super cool.
And now another one here. What practice do you suggest, for example, for someone that is preparing their second or third already product review, but it's someone that's really insecure, really needs more confidence and readiness? What are like the top 5 or top 3 tips that you could say to them?
Yeah, so I call this the 2/3 rule, and I put a name on it because I want you to remember it after you listen to this podcast. When I was in high school, my activity, one of them, an individual activity relating back to what we were talking about earlier, was extemporaneous speaking. So in extemporaneous speaking, they would give you a question. You had 30 minutes to prepare an 8-minute speech. And the majority of the competitors would use those 30 minutes to write out their content, to just make their content awesome. They would have like huge research files with them. So you could consider that like your user and data insights that they're like pulling from. They're like taking quotes, etc. So they'd spend their 30 minutes on that and they'd craft some stellar content. I had a different strategy. I spent 20 minutes creating the content and 10 minutes practicing. And I won many of those competitions as a result. The practice was so important because when you're giving a speech or when you're public speaking, which a product review essentially is, you're really like nailing how to say things so that they don't sound dumb, how to say things so that they accommodate your confidence level. And also you uncover gaps in your content when you actually say it and practice it versus when it's just on the page. Because when it's just on that page, when it's just that slide deck or that Notion document, you're holding 1,000 tiny little details in your head. And when you actually go to practice it, you realize which of those details were only in your head and not on the paper. So the 2/3 rule is easily the most important thing. If you only have 3 hours to prepare for your next product review, spend 2 hours of those on the content and 1 hour practicing. The second thing is you want to nail predictable, tough questions. This is why for a lot of my product reviews, I would actually ask my designer, engineer, and at a firm that analyst who was so helpful, hey, please join up with me and let's just review this content. And can you tell me like, what are the tough questions? What are the things that we're missing? So I would get like a human who wasn't me to give me feedback on these are some of the tough questions. And then most importantly, I wouldn't just leave it on myself to answer. I would use them to say, what's our plan for answering this? Oftentimes the engineer might volunteer, I'm going to do this. The designer might volunteer, I'm going to do this. The analyst or user researcher might volunteer. So that preparation is just so important. The discussion of the tough questions with your group. The third thing, I think almost nobody I know does this reliably, but the very few people who do have a huge impact from it, which is record yourself. So jump in front of your webcam, go to photo booth if you're on a Mac, go to Zoom and just record it if you're on a Windows or whatever tool you like to use, and give the content. And then watch back that content and look at, did I have a lot of ums? Was I really moving too fast? Was I talking too much? This is the easy problem we can run into. All those things, I think, are the most important ways to prevent any mistakes and prepare.
Yeah. So actually, like doing the preparation, like putting some effort into it, saving time to make sure that you're nailing it. It's a key part that maybe a lot of people overlook. They just have the meeting there, they put up some slides and they go in, and without going actually through the FAQs, these questions that will probably come up, and also rehearsing and aligning with the whole team. Those are super important points for sure. I would like to ask you just briefly, as we're getting to the end, we still have a few more minutes, but I also wanted to address one specific type of review, which is more for leaders, and we also have some leaders listening. How do these strategy and vision reviews differ from other types of reviews, and what should be prioritized in those meetings, and how can leaders prepare for those?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about the leader perspective, because I would say I was pretty disappointed with how some of my peer leaders would show up to these reviews. So let's first talk about just like generally how to make a strategy and vision review succeed for all partners, and then let's talk about leaders and their personal role. So with a strategy and vision review, what is our goal, right? Our goal is to align on the key business and user problems that we're going to prioritize. It's to create enough guidance for the actual ICs, the engineers on the ground, the designers on the ground, to build things with enough context to solve those business and user problems that we've prioritized. And it's to distill the vast amounts of competitive and cross-functional context that we have as leaders for those groups. So the PM and the leaders together need to do that. And what a leader should do in a product review is, instead of trying to play the gotcha game, what they should try to do is focus in on the business problem. And what I find my favorite product leaders do, I remember Chung Man Tim, who hired me at a firm, he was SVP of product. he used to always ask, what's the most important problem we're solving? That was his favorite question in these strategy and vision reviews. And then he would continue to go deep on that, and he would share his competitive context. He used to get called into a lot of sales deals. So when we were selling Walmart, when we were selling Shopify, when we were selling Amazon, he was the representative from product side. And so he would share like the context. When I was talking to Kaz, the COO at Shopify, I learned that Shopify really cares about branding a firm as Shop Pay. So how are we building into our platform the ability for more partners to brand as themselves? I wonder if this is really the top problem. And so he's providing the context. And then further, so someone I worked with at Epic Games, he was leading Fortnite. And before that, he had led a bunch of the Call of Duty games. His name was Jason. He was providing amazing framework for the team to actually execute. So he would jump in on a gun maybe that we were creating in Fortnite, and he would explain like, oh, this feels off because the feedback is coming like 4 milliseconds late. And he was so good at gaming that he could actually notice that. Or he would say something like incredibly tactical that also would allow people to give texture to these high-level business problems. So that's what I think you should try to do as a product leader, is provide those types of feedback instead of trying to catch the PM off guard.
Cool. Awesome. That's great advice and ways to think also for our leaders listening to our chat. Now I think getting a bit off this topic of product reviews, I think we covered a lot, and also we'll link to your post about it in the show notes so people can go and dive deeper on it. We briefly covered this thing about relationships, building and maintaining those relationships, but I wanted to ask you for some specific advice on that, on how can a PM build these key relationships and maintain them and nurture them, so that also in reviews, but not only on reviews, in other things that you need to interact with these other stakeholders, you have them more on your side than as adversaries trying to fight you and to, what was the word that you used, to attack you basically on your back.
Yes. I think that everybody listening at this point, just based on that question, understands the what and the why. So let me talk about the how and specific tactics. I think that tactically there are maybe like 4 or 5 things that I found myself repeating to PMs on my teams when they had issues with this. Number 1, can I see your map of stakeholders? And I would always ask this question, and a lot of them wouldn't have it. Like, who are the people who might chime in your promotion committee, who might chime in on your performance review? Who are the people who are going to be leaving you 360 feedback? Let's see that. In that map of stakeholders, let's record, ideally from your last 360 review from them, what they judged you and rated you as. You create this map and you approach it just like your product. Everybody who gave you a negative rating, that's somebody you need to probably flip to positive, but prioritize those people who gave you a neutral or negative rating by how important they are. And so create this prioritization framework and literally have in your mind. So for me at Apollo, most recently, one of those people was our SVP of marketing. I said, he's giving me currently probably just a neutral review. I'm leading up product and growth. It's pretty important for him to give me like a highly positive review. So the next cycle, I did get that positive review, but that was because I basically said, he's the most important person for me to flip. So now let's go into the tactics of how you flip these people. So I continuously found that PMs, this is a harsh reality. Some of you people aren't hearing this. PMs often get overwhelmed by the amount of work they need to get done. They often set up for themselves, I want to get these 100 things done today. They get 60 of them done. It's the end of the day. They feel burnt out and tired, and they log off. And those 40 things, they'll find that consistently day after day, week after week, month after month, the same sort of 40 things fall off. And they'll refer back to the leverage neutral overhead framework of Shreyas and say, oh, those were just overhead and it's fine. But if that SVP of marketing who you need to flip is consistently in that bottom 40, then you've really hit a problem. And so what I would say is that you need to elevate the priority of some of these relationship building tasks. And alongside of that, I find that some PMs are worried about message volume and frequency. So they're like, hey, I don't want to write a 7-paragraph email to this SVP every 3 or 4 days when he responds to 30% of them. But guess what? He generally will appreciate that you are providing that level of detail. Even if he didn't read some, even if he didn't respond to some, what he'll think is, wow, Brito or Joao is somebody who's really on top of all the details, who's always keeping me informed, that I know I can always jump into my email inbox or my Slack thread with him or the Slack channel that he's talking about the project and catch an instant update that is credible and strong. And so I had a PM on my team at a firm who really taught me this. She was so good at this. And specifically in managing like 7 levels above her all the way to the CEO, where she would be sending us like big update before the pre-read, big update day after the product review, big update week after the product review, big update 2 weeks after the product review. Turns out CEO didn't respond to any of those, but she ships the feature and the CEO shouts it out to the whole company because she demonstrated so much reliability alongside it. That sort of frequency and depth. I find that some people who do frequency shy away from the depth. She certainly didn't. She had really long messages. Even today, I'm still learning because I struggle with that, but long messages, long detail, long context. But as a result, you knew exactly where her and her team were in the process. And yeah, of course, she got promoted multiple times.
Yeah, just an important caveat there. I think it's not writing it long just for the sake of making it long. Don't go to ChatGPT to make it longer, to turn the 3 bullet points into a full email, but going really deep into the details of like, maybe this was the metric, this team did this and this happened, we got this feedback. So going in depth and not just long messages, right? I think that was the key thing here. Awesome. And I have another question. I think we could go long on this one, so let's try to keep it short, just an overview for the sake of time, and we can maybe have another conversation in the future more about this. What do you see are the future trends or the key emerging trends in product management, and how can aspiring PMs or more junior to mid-level PMs prepare for them?
Yeah, so just to keep it very lightning session, number one is that the ratio of PMs to engineers will probably stabilize around 10-1. Whereas in the ZERP era, we saw it around 7-1 or 5-1 even, or even 3-1 where there were true overhiring. So you should be expecting that you need to build processes where you're not in every single detail and that you're really focused on the why and the what and outsourcing some of the how and the details to your design and tech partners. That's one. The second is that AI is not going to take your job. I said it's at 10-1. And software engineering is going to grow really fast. It's going to continue to grow really fast. And so PM is going to continue to grow as a profession. So you shouldn't be scared away from pursuing it just because of the recent layoffs that have occurred. And the third thing is that those PMs who are good at leveraging AI, so not using ChatGPT to make your email stronger, but actually using ChatGPT to make your email shorter, or using ChatGPT to say, last time I sent an email to this person, they had this negative feedback. What negative feedback are they going to have on this email? Or using Chat PRD to write the first draft of your PRD, or using Lenny's newsletter bot to get feedback on what good retention is. These types of things can be super helpful and impactful for your work, and using Code Interpreter to analyze your data. Those would be the 3 trends that I think are most important in a Lightning format.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for sharing.
And adding up to the, now you already talked a little bit about, for example, Lenny newsletter, but what other resources? Well, of course, your newsletter and this podcast, but what other resources do you recommend for people to actually follow and try to learn something when they are breaking into PM or fresh PMs?
Sure. Breaking into PM, I'm a big fan of Product Alliance and Exponent and Rocket Blocks. When you're an early career PM, I'm a huge fan of Reforge. Ideally, you can get your company to pay for that because it's really expensive. I'm a pretty big fan of some other newsletters we haven't mentioned. Product Compass by Huryn, How They Grow by Jaryd Hermann, The Pragmatic Engineer by Gergely Orosz, ByteByteGo by Alex Zhu, Strategy Breakdowns by Tom Alder. I'm a big fan of the Acquired podcast, this podcast, the Melissa Perry's podcast, Lenny's podcast, PG, Silicon Valley Product Group, Marty Kagan has recently started a podcast. Reforge has a podcast. So there's so many resources out there. The final sort of tip I'll say is all of the stuff, if you don't resonate with it, just unfollow. You don't need to like, some of this stuff, content, maybe it's targeted at a different ICP than you. It's no big deal. A lot of people I feel are like upset that there's so many content creators out there. I think it's a blessing for this career. I've been in this career for so long. I remember when there were none. I think people have a bevy of options to choose from and just figure out which ones resonate with you.
That's great advice, and also something we've personally struggled with, and we've seen people struggle with, that there's just so much and so many people saying relatively different things that it's confusing to see who should I listen to. But yeah, I always give that advice also, like if it's not resonating, if you're not enjoying, just find something else. There's like different formats, different types of content, different ways of sharing, so find yours. Hopefully yours will be somewhat like we're doing it here at the Product Weekend, keeping it familiar and friendly. But if it doesn't resonate, just turn off the podcast and find one that resonates more. I think that's a great message. All right, so we're wrapping it up. Just to close the episode, I just have 3 more questions, sprint questions for short answers. Are you ready for it?
Yes.
Let's go. So the first one is, what's one digital product that you would struggle to live without?
Probably at this point, the most important digital product for me that I couldn't live without is the Robinhood app. I've just been shifting more and more of my money into it because I find that the problem with everything else out there is there's so many steps involved to manage it. The payments take so long. Like when I take money out of a different brokerage account, I find that it takes 6 days to land in my bank balance. Robinhood will try to get you on an instant transfer, but in reality, they just instant transfer it anyways for you. And it just ends up in your bank balance right away. There's so many sort of small things where they've cut out all of the speed problems that I can use it. And they also offer 5% savings. So I can use it like literally for my regular sort of expenses and stuff. So I love it. And that's one app I couldn't live without.
Nice. Cool one. And what's the most underrated skill in product management?
Underrated. So it's starting to get some traction finally, thanks to some creators like Clairvaux. But in general, I think it's technical skills. There has been an incorrect swing of the pendulum where like a bunch of PMs got hired and maybe they did succeed, but they didn't have a technical background. I much prefer myself, or in general the PMs I've managed, I found that the ones who have had a technical background do much better. Ideally, you've literally shipped code with a big gnarly code base before. You've figured out what it means to instrument telemetry and events into your features so that you can actually measure it. You've figured out what it means to turn on a feature flag. If you've actually done those things, first, your engineers are going to have a lot more respect for you. 2, you're going to have a much better intuition about how much time things take. 3, you're going to be able to advocate for tech debt much more. And 4, and perhaps most importantly, you're going to be able to build products at the edge of what's recently possible. Instead of just dreaming up like, we're going to have a LLM that categorizes all your emails perfectly. Is that currently possible? What would be required? Maybe we need to tag their data. Maybe they need to tag the first 100 versions themselves so that it then has a training set. Understanding those technical details, I find makes you a much better PM.
Nice one. That's counterintuitive, or at least counter-current right now. People are mostly, at least from what I've heard, saying the opposite, that you don't need to be technical, but I'm not sure if it's 100% necessary skill, but I think it makes it much easier, and especially if you're in these high-tech things that you're mentioning, you definitely need to understand what you're talking about when it comes to the tech side of things. Cool one. Lastly, if you could shadow any product manager or leader for a day, who would it be?
I love that. For me, I've been pretty inspired by how Brian Chesky runs things at Airbnb. I just feel like he is willing to shake things up. He's willing to make quick decisions. He used to have a lot of product managers. Now he's collect product marketing into product management. He's changing the field. He's being design led. He's having less releases. He's having more releases. But most importantly, his companies are succeeding. If you look at Airbnb compared to the hotel chains and their market cap, it continues to steal market cap. It continues to grow and expand. There continue to be scandals about it, but it continues to weather the storm. And also, so many of his views, I feel like, are first principles instead of just, this is the group average of what venture capitalists are recommending today or what in vogue content creators and product leaders are recommending today. So he's thinking about it on his own. So it would be really cool to just learn more and see how he works.
Cool. Awesome one. Nice. So yeah, that's it for our chat today. Before we wrap up, anything else that you'd like to say on how people can get to you, or can they be useful to you, or anything else that you'd like to mention?
Oh, thank you all for listening for an hour now. If you want to get to me, you can DM me on LinkedIn or X. I have DMs open. If you want to hear more of this, I have a paid newsletter, which is my full-time focus. And if you want to be helpful, you can comment when you agree or disagree with the social media post.
Awesome. Engagement, super important. Cool. All right. That's it for today. We still have the release notes in a second. So yeah, Aakash, great catching up. Nice seeing you. Do let us know when you're around Europe.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was great chatting with you. Thanks a lot
Thank you,
for
Aakash.
joining us.
Likewise. And let me know when you're happen to be in North Carolina or something nearby.
Will do. Awesome. Bye-bye. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.
This was a really fun and exciting episode. So now I'm going to go through the release notes to make sure that we have the main takeaways from the conversation. If I miss anything or if we miss anything in the show notes, make sure to drop us a text. We'll be happy to add them later on to the show notes so that we can make sure that everyone has access to it. Yeah, let's get it started. We started talking about the essential qualities for a PM in the perspective of what are some innate things, and two things that Aakash pointed out was how much you like working in teams. This can reflect itself in how much you enjoy team sports versus individual sports, for instance. That's something that you can reflect on. And another one is, can you live without long, deep work time? Because context switching is a reality for PMs, and you need to be able to live with that. This is something that actually Aakash mentioned that he himself felt that it was not something for him, and that's one of the reasons why he decided to change a bit his career direction at the moment. He also talked about his proudest moment in his career was a project at Epic Games where they did the Travis Scott live in-game concert where there were 28 million plus people live in just one concert. It was a super fun experience. And then we talked about product reviews, and this was the bulk of our conversation. So if you're interested, make sure to go back and listen to more detail on what we discussed. We started with 4 types, let's say, of product review, depending on the type of people you're talking with. It can be the product pod review, just a quick review with the team, product org review, PMs that are working on the similar things, for instance. Then a leadership review, it's something with VP, CEO, head of marketing, stakeholders that are working directly with you. And then there's an executive review, which is something more on the C-level, more strategic. And each of these have different types of preparation and things that you should account for. In all of them, you want to lead with data and user insights. That's a very important part of it. And you want to join forces with your team to prepare it with them, but also to leverage their expertise and their knowledge to give the answers directly to the stakeholders. If you're just an IC product manager, you should probably assume that psychological safety is not there and that things can fire back. So you should be prepared for every edge case and really put in the work to make sure that you go into the review completely confident on what you're going to say and ready for whatever questions may come. And when these questions come, when this feedback comes during the meeting, make sure that you're not defensive or aggressive towards your stakeholders. Try to see their perspective as well. Some specific tips, and Aakash got into a bit more detail during the episode, but essentially rephrase what other people are saying to make sure that you're on the same page, and then make sure that you address it either in a later meeting, either in another format, but don't let it pass unnoticed, especially if it's valid feedback for you and for the product. And this pretty much aligns with something else, which is if you have messed up at some point, make sure you follow up and you make it up for what you have misunderstood or overlook, and try to follow up with the stakeholder and make sure that you deliver. Then we talked also about how PMs can build relationships, and one first thing is mapping your stakeholders, and also another critical one is keeping people informed in a detailed and context-rich format. We also talked about trends in product management. Aakash believes that the ratio between PMs and engineers will stabilize around 10-1, compared to maybe 6-1 or 7-1, which was more common until recently. He also mentions that AI will not take your job. PM will continue to grow as a profession because software development is still growing, and that PMs are in a good position to leverage AI to do their work better and more efficiently. And yeah, he also shared a lot of resources. Make sure to check the show notes to find all of these, and also to learn more from Aakash. You can follow his newsletter. And this is about it for today. We're gonna wrap up this season for a little pause. We're coming with something special during summer, and we'll be back to another season in the same format again after this special season that we'll be launching. So we're experimenting a bit in the good spirit of product management. So if you have any feedback, if you have any ideas that we should test, make sure to reach out to us. We'll be very happy to hear your feedback. And that's about it. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and see you in the next one.